Who do you hope the next Conservative leader will be, and who do you think the next Conservative leader will be?
I'm not going to make any predictions about what's going to happen. You cannot have decent public services if you don't have a strong free enterprise economy. And I think one of the most exciting things that's happening now in Britain is the new generation that's coming through. And I think that we need a simpler tax system, because the easiest way for corporations, or in fact individuals, to dodge taxes if you have a very, very complex system. We're going to see some really bold policies that can transform Britain in a positive way. Well, I agree that you can't separate social and economic issues. I mean, to me, the most important issue is freedom. It's about people having control over their own lives. And you can't have social freedom without having economic freedom. If you don't have control over your own money, if you can't chart your own future, you are not truly free. I don't believe it is the government's job to decide how many hours you work, or what your role in the economy should be, or what investment there should be in the economy. I want to see people more empowered to do that themselves. And I think we do have an exciting new generation who are more likely to set up their own businesses, more likely to want to live that type of life. And I think the problem we've got with politics at the moment, and I think why there is a demand for political change, is that we've seen a very technocratic managerial approach to politics. So it is what Vince was talking about the tractor production statistics. People don't want to just hear a bunch of stats from politicians about how everything's getting better. They want to feel that they have a role in shaping their own future. So I think there are a lot of issues around devolution. You know, Britain is an over-centralised country. I think we should be giving more control locally. Of course, the ultimate locality is the person themselves being able to make those decisions. I think also there's a rebellion against focus grouping and the idea that you can get a successful policy by simply just testing it with the public and seeing which thing is more popular, which started off with Blair and Brown, but frankly has been carried on in more recent years as well. And I don't see this as an entirely new phenomenon. I first got interested in politics in the 1980s, and it was much more ideological. There was much more of a debate about what sort of society you wanted to live in, what you wanted the future of the country to be like. And I think there's an appetite for the public to hear much more of those types of discussions, which are essentially about values. And Richard and I disagree about what those values ought to be. But what it certainly isn't the case is there's just one way of doing things, and it's simply a question of whether you're a good or bad manager. And I think that turned people off. And one thing that I really like about the new politics is more people are involved. People can say what they like about the Brexit referendum, but a hell of a lot of people went out and voted. If you remember, so that some of those elections in 2000s polled beneath, lower than 60% of people were voting and participating in politics. And one thing no one has mentioned so far is social media. Social media has given power to people to have a voice in the political debate, which they simply haven't had before. And that you can see the impact of that in the US, you can see that impact of that here in Britain, and some people don't like it. But my view is previously those discussions weren't being had. The number 10 grid was managing what would be talked about each day of the week. That simply isn't true anymore, and I think that's a good thing. So I like the fact that we're now in an age of talking about ideas, and I think that politicians on the right need to respond to that. I started my career off in Shell, so I've worked for a big corporation, I've also worked in government, and what always strikes me is how similar the organisations are rather than how different they are, whether it's the internal politics, whether it's the bureaucracy. And most people, go to work every day trying to do a good job, regardless of which organisation they're working for. But the idea that these are totally different animals, I think, is mistaken. I think it's a very similar structure they work to. And I agree with this point that it is essentially the new entrants, the people who are disruptors and prepared to stand apart from the crowd where those new ideas are generated.
But why can't we tax them?
Why can't
we tax Google and Amazon?
Well, we do, and
barely. So they pay such tiny percentages of their profits.
Well, we are looking at that, and Mel Stride, my colleague, is looking at a digital tax. But one of the important things when taxing corporations is making sure you've got global agreements to do that, to make sure that you can tax them in a way that doesn't just allow them to move their profits. Because we know companies like Starbucks have been able, by claiming that, it's, a trademark around their mermaid thing, that they've, is based in the Cayman Islands, to get around the rules. So you have to have rules that work. And I think that we need a simpler tax system, because the easiest way for corporations, or in fact individuals, to dodge taxes if you have a very, very complex system. So that's why I'm a big fan of tax simplification, to achieve just that. But there's no such thing as free money or easy ways to tax. There isn't, I can tell you. And Anatole made the point about tax rates being much higher in the 70s. But what's very interesting is the tax burden hasn't actually changed very much for the past 50 years. It's about 37% now, and it's stayed roughly the same regardless of who we tax. And it's the same people that always end up paying it. And if you look at our pension system and our tax system, it's still designed around the idea of a paternalistic employer. I don't think that's what the balance between employer and individual should be. I want people to feel that they have power over their own pensions, over their own childcare arrangements. I want them to feel that they own their own future. So I'd like to see pensions owned by the person rather than the company, paid directly into the person's pension account, in the same way we now do with childcare vouchers. And I also think that with the advent of fibre, we can see much more flexibility in terms of the way people work. I hope we can see more people working for multiple employers, being able to build up a portfolio as they go through their life. I mean, I don't know if any of you have read the book, The 100-Year Life, but I'm certainly expecting to be working for quite a long time. We're all going to have multiple employers. So it's important that we feel that we can own our future security, that we can own the flexibility around our lives, and we can own that ability to shape our future. I think that's really important. And I think the tax and benefits system has a lot to catch up on in terms of the way people live their lives. Because if you're anything like me, you'll find that there is endless complexity in terms of things like pension arrangements. It's not simple, it's not transparent about what you do. Childcare is something in this country that is still a massive bind for many, many working parents. And I do think we've got fantastic primary schools, but often they close at 3 o'clock. One of the things I'm looking at is the potential to pay primary schools more if they open longer hours to provide on-site childcare, so that they're more flexible for working parents. Because I think we need to adjust the services of the state, such as education and health, to the way people live now, not the way they used to live in the 1950s or the way they lived in the 19th century. Well, the fact is that Britain's economy was in a dire situation in the 1970s, and it was turned around by a series of supply-side reforms,
and
which
North Sea oil money.
And North Sea oil money. But what I would say now is we do face a different set of challenges, but we need to apply free market mechanisms to solve those challenges. So, for example, housing. Richard talked about 1945. I think one of the worst legacies of that government was the Town and Country Planning Act, which essentially made huge swathes of our country impossible to build on. We're now in a situation
you mean the
where...
Green Belt, for instance?
Well, the Green Belt in London, but we're now in a situation where people in London who are renting are paying 50% of their income in rent. If you look at a city like Tokyo, that has much freer planning policies, the rents are much lower, people can afford to live in that city. So that, to me, is a protectionist top-down planning policy. It isn't a free market policy that's... But, do you see what I mean? If we had a freer policy, if we allowed building around stations in our green belt, which would be much more environmentally friendly than putting those houses in the countryside because people would be able to commute into work. We could build 1 million homes for young people in our greatest city. That to me is a radical solution to a social and economic problem, which is giving people more power over their own lives. And I think the Labour Party aren't willing to take those kind of steps. I think what we've seen is different nation states have more power than they used to. So we've seen a huge growth in the power of Eastern nation states in particular. If you asked, does the Chinese state have more power than it used to? Yes, it does. It is stopping people speaking freely. It's arresting political dissidents. It has
it's been doing that for quite a long time.
Yeah, but it has. What's changed is has a hell of a lot. It has a hell of a lot of economic power, which it didn't have. It's a growing economy. It's growing relatively on the world stage, and I think that's what we're seeing. So, I don't think we should conflate the issue of corporations versus nations with a changing sense of where power in the world lies. I think it lies in different places, and I think that's what we're feeling here in the West.
So you don't think actually it's a function of globalization? You think it's a function of the declining power of the West and increasing power of the East?
Yes. Or I think that is what people are feeling, and I think that's sometimes seen as it's because corporates have more power. I don't think that's true. I think it's because we are seeing the power migrate elsewhere, and that's essentially based on economics. We've seen a huge growth in Asia over the last 20, 30 years, and it's continuing to rise. And I think one of the most exciting things that's happening now in Britain is the new generation that's coming through. And I think this is a different generation from ones we've seen before. I describe them as Airbnb-ing, Uber riding, Deliveroo eating freedom fighters. And I see some people in the audience shaking their heads, but we see opinion polling shows that younger people are more likely to set up businesses. So there's been an 85% increase in 18 to 24-year-olds setting up businesses in the last 4 years. They're more likely to have a side hustle alongside the normal work they're doing, whether it's running a YouTube channel, whether it's renting out a bedroom on Airbnb, whether it's working in the economy in different ways. And I think it is because that generation has grown up with more freedom than previous generations, more information at their fingertips, and more capability. And I don't think it's surprising that that generation believe in lower taxes than older people generally do. They're also more interested in things like public service reform. So I think that shows that there are people out there who want more opportunities in British society. And I think that over the next few years, we've got the opportunity to get that energy, use that energy, and help Britain become a more successful economy, to get rates of economic growth up, but also to raise the opportunity of every individual in this country to help them live their best life. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, the free enterprise economy is absolutely key to that. That is the thing that gives people the ability to be able to take control of their own destiny. You don't have freedom over being able to live your own life if you can't control your own money. And that's why I think it's so important that we keep taxes low on people, particularly on those businesses that are just starting out, where people want to take a risk, they want to aspire, they want to do things differently. I also think that we need to make sure the government is doing less better. So I've been doing a series of spending review roundtables around the country, talking to people about where they want public money spent. And what people say is they want money spent on core public services like the police or education or health, making sure our roads work. And I think that is where we should be focusing our efforts. And too often, I mean, we have seen a bit of a creeper plant of a government where we now have 305 different quangos and regulators, which cost 2.5 billion. And we've seen more and more regulations placed on people's everyday lives and businesses. So is it really the business of government to be saying to people how big their pizza should be or what the minimum price of a glass of wine should be? I would rather the government is focusing on those core basics that are going to help people get on in life. And if the ultimate devolution of power is to the individual, which I believe firmly that we need to empower people, and as people become more capable, more informed, they're better placed to take decisions than the government are. But as that happens, I also think we need to devolve more power to local authorities. Well, I think the Conservative Party needs to be bold. I don't think it's good enough for us to just justify the status quo. I think we need to show how we're going to make sure there are more houses, particularly for younger people to be able to afford to get on the housing ladder. I think we need to show what we're doing in terms of taxation, because we need to get economic growth up. We need to drive the economy forward. And we need to ultimately allow people to be able to keep more of their own money. So what I'm hoping from the leadership election is that we're going to see some really bold policies that can transform Britain in a positive way. We need to show how Britain can become a better place. So, for example, how do we make sure that cities like Leeds and Manchester and counties like Norfolk are as fast growing and as productive as London, that it's a great place to set up a business, to have a life? To me, those are really important as well. My overall message is that we are not in a state of perpetual decline as a country. We have lots of opportunities. We need to open them up, and we need to make some tough decisions. So areas like opening up the London Green Belt, making our schools offer higher levels of childcare, those things can transform people's lives. But most importantly, they can give people the freedom and the feeling of control that they own their own future. Thank you very much.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.